If this man walked down the street, would you recognize him as Jesus? A homeless man enters McDonald's asking for just a glass of water. A small request, but the way people respond reveals everything. Those with love in their hearts are blessed. Those who turn away face a hard lesson. Watch this story to see how God sometimes shows up in ways we least expect. The real question is, will you recognize him? The morning sun cast a golden hue over the bustling city streets. People rushed about, lost in their daily routines, their minds occupied with work, schedules, and responsibilities. None of them noticed the filthy homeless man slowly making his way down the sidewalk. His hair was long, unkempt, and tangled. His beard, streaked with gray, hung scruffily over his gaunt face. His clothes were tattered, stained, and covered in dust, barely clinging to his thin frame. His shoes were so worn out that his toes peeked through the holes. Worst of all was the stench. The unmistakable odor of someone who had gone days, perhaps weeks, without bathing. Pedestrians recoiled as he passed by. A woman covered her nose and whispered to her friend, "Oh, why do they let these people roam around?" A businessman stepped aside, muttering in irritation, "They should just round them up and get rid of them." A group of teenagers smirked and chuckled as they whispered among themselves. But none of them knew that the homeless man was Jesus. The homeless man stepped inside a McDonald's, the cool air washing over him. The scent of food filled the air, but hunger wasn't what brought him here. He walked up to the counter and softly asked the young cashier, "Excuse me, may I have a glass of water?" The cashier, a young woman in her early 20s, grimaced and took a step back. The smell made her stomach churn. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Before she could even respond, a heavy-set man in a bright red suit stormed toward the counter. His round face was flushed with irritation, his bald head glistening under the fluorescent lights. This was Mr. Bradley, the manager. He had seen the man enter and had been watching from a distance, already prepared to intervene. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. The homeless man met his eyes, his voice soft yet steady. "Just a glass of water." Mr. Bradley let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Water? You think this is a public fountain? We don't serve freeloaders here." The homeless man didn't flinch. He simply nodded, as if he had expected this response. "I do not ask for food," he said, "just water." Mr. Bradley sneered, shaking his head. "Water, huh? Fine, you want water?" Mr. Bradley's lips curled into a sneer as he grabbed a plastic cup, filled it to the brim with water, and turned, not toward the homeless man, but toward a small potted plant sitting on the counter. With deliberate slowness, he tilted the cup, letting the water spill over the leaves and trickle down into the soil. The cold liquid splashed against the rim, a few drops landing on the counter. The homeless man watched silently as the last drops disappeared into the dirt. Mr. Bradley set the empty cup down with a loud clunk, then folded his arms and smirked. "There's your water," he said mockingly. "Looks like the plant needed it more than you." A few customers chuckled. Some exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. For a moment, the restaurant was silent. At a corner table, a young boy had been watching everything. He was around 10 years old, with messy black hair and bright, observant eyes. Unlike the others, he didn't look away. His name was Liam. As the laughter and whispers faded into the background, Liam felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't understand why people found it funny to humiliate a man who only asked for a sip of water. He didn't understand why no one had spoken up. Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a few coins he had saved up. He slid off his chair, walked to the counter, and placed the coins down with quiet determination. "I want to buy a glass of water." The cashier hesitated. She glanced nervously at Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley's face twisted in irritation. "Why are you wasting your money on this bum?" he snapped. "He's just going to come back begging for more." Liam didn't respond. He didn't argue. He didn't even look at Mr. Bradley. Instead, he picked up the glass of water himself, turned, and walked over to the homeless man. Holding out the cup with both hands, he said simply, "Here, sir." The homeless man's blue eyes softened with warmth. He looked at Liam for a long moment, then gently accepted the water. But he didn't drink it right away. Instead, he gazed at Liam with a knowing smile, his voice calm yet filled with meaning. "Do you know why I only asked for water?" Liam shook his head. "Because I do not need more than what is enough." As the homeless man took a sip, Mr. Bradley's patience snapped. He grabbed a large bucket filled with ice-cold water and, with a cruel grin, threw it directly onto the homeless man's face. Water splashed everywhere, drenching the man's hair, beard, and ragged clothes. The restaurant fell silent for a moment, shocked by the sudden act. Then, some customers began to chuckle. "There's your water?" Mr. Bradley laughed mockingly. A few others joined in, shaking their heads in amusement. The young boy gasped, eyes wide with horror. He wanted to say something to defend the man, but he was too stunned to speak. The homeless man did not react. He simply wiped the water from his face, his expression calm, almost sorrowful. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Liam quickly turned toward the glass windows to see where the homeless man was going, but he was gone. The street outside was empty. There was no alleyway, no corner he could have turned. He had simply vanished. The next morning, Mr. Bradley drove to work as usual. The sun was unbearably hot, and traffic was horrendous. His car's air conditioning was broken. Sweat dripped down his forehead, soaking into his expensive red suit. The heat was suffocating, and worst of all, he was desperately thirsty. The traffic jam dragged on for hours. He could see a convenience store across the street, but he was stuck in the car. There was no way to get to it. As his throat burned with dryness, a homeless man approached his car window. In his hand was a cold bottle of water. The man knocked on the window and grinned. "Are you thirsty?" Mr. Bradley's eyes lit up. He frantically nodded. "Yes, please, I'll pay you. Just give me that water." The homeless man's smile widened, but he did not hand over the bottle. Instead, he leaned closer and whispered, "Yesterday you refused water to a thirsty man. Today, you are the one who thirsts." Mr. Bradley's heart pounded. His hands trembled as he blinked in shock. And just like that, the homeless man was gone. Mr. Bradley sat frozen, staring at the empty street where the man had stood just a moment ago. He suddenly remembered the piercing blue eyes of the homeless man he had humiliated the day before. He remembered the way he had vanished without a trace. And in that moment, he realized the truth. The man he had mocked and thrown water on was Jesus. His hands began to shake. His throat was dry, not just from thirst, but from fear. He had been tested, and he had failed. From that day forward, Mr. Bradley never mistreated the homeless again. He no longer turned them away, no longer dismissed them as nuisances. He could never erase what he had done, but he could change what he did next. As for the young boy, Liam, he never forgot what had happened. The image of the man, the test, and the lesson remained etched in his heart. A simple glass of water had revealed everything: the cruelty of some, the kindness of others, and the presence of something far greater than anyone had realized. Because sometimes God walks among us. The question is, will you recognize him when he does?